Wyoming Territory, autumn of 1879. The wind bit through the valley like it had a grudge, and Eliza Kersey had not eaten in 2 days. She stood near the edge of the Lakota camp, clutching her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her boots were cracked, the soles giving out from the miles she had walked. Behind her, tucked under a felled pine, her 2 children Daisy and Daniel waited, too weak to cry anymore but still watching her with hollow eyes. Eliza's husband had died last winter when the fever swept through their small homestead near the Big Horn Mountains. With no neighbors close enough to help and no kin to turn to, she had held on for as long as she could. Then the food ran out. Then the mule died. Now she was here, starving, alone. Begging. A few people in the Lakota camp had already turned away from her with guarded eyes, and she did not blame them. She was a white woman, a settler's widow, and she had nothing to offer in return for the kindness she sought. But she could not let her children die, not like this. She stepped closer to the fire at the camp center, where a tall man with dark braids and a wide chest was slicing strips of meat onto a flat stone. His hands were steady, movements sure. He looked up as she neared, his gaze unreadable. "I am sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. "I do not want to steal. I only ask for food, for my children, please." She did not cry. She had done that already days ago when Daniel collapsed on the trail and she had to carry him in her arms for the last half-mile. The man studied her, then stood to his full height. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 30, maybe less, but there was something in his eyes, an old, quiet strength. He said nothing at first, just walked past her. Eliza turned quickly, thinking he had dismissed her. Her knees buckled. But then he stepped under the pine and knelt before her children. He unwrapped the bundle he carried and placed warm strips of meat into Daisy's and Daniel's hands. Gently, tenderly. He helped Daniel sit up and drink from a canteen. Eliza stared, stunned. When he returned to her side, he handed her a piece as well. She took it with shaking fingers, unable to form words. "I am called Mato," he said, voice low. "You and your children will eat tonight and the days after." Eliza's throat tightened. Why would you help me?" His eyes met hers. "Because no mother should have to beg to keep her children alive." He took her arm then, not roughly but firmly, and guided her toward one of the empty tippies near the fire. "You will rest here tonight. There is warmth and you need it." Eliza hesitated, but her body gave her no choice. She stumbled once and he caught her. His arm was strong beneath her shoulders. Inside the tipi, she sank to the ground near the fire pit. Mato brought in the children, wrapped them in buffalo hides, and set another pot to boil with roots and meat. The smell nearly made Eliza weep. That night, she did not sleep much. She watched him from under her blanket as he moved quietly about the camp. He did not speak much, but he checked on her children often. He covered Daisy's feet more tightly when she kicked off the blanket. He knelt by Daniel when he coughed. Eliza had not been touched with kindness since her husband died. This man, this stranger, had given her more in one night than she had known in a year. The next morning, she woke with her daughter curled against her side and her son breathing evenly beside her. She rose slowly and stepped outside. Mato was there tending a horse. "Good morning," she said, her voice still raw. He nodded. "They are stronger today." "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." He looked up at her then, the early sun catching the edge of his cheekbone. "You have nowhere to go, do you?" She shook her head. "Our farm is gone, burned. The barn collapsed in spring. There is nothing left." A long silence stretched between them. Then he said, "You can stay here, for now, help with meals, watch the children. If you want to work, there is always work." Something in her chest broke loose. She had not been offered choice in so long. "I would like that," she said. In the days that followed, she did as he said. She helped where she could. She watched the children, braided herbs for the older women, learned the rhythm of the camp. Mato did not hover, but he was never far. He showed Daniel how to tie knots with sinew. He carved a small wooden horse for Daisy. He brought Eliza dried berries, and when she coughed, he left pine tea by her blanket. She found herself watching him more, the way he moved with quiet care, the way he listened when others spoke. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the children laughed at something Daniel had said, Eliza found herself beside him at the fire again. "You do not have to keep helping us," she said softly. "We are not your burden." He turned his head slightly, eyes steady. "You are not a burden. You are a woman who has lost much. That does not make you less." She looked down at her hands. "You speak like someone who has lost too." He was quiet for a long time, then he said, "My wife and son died 3 winters ago, fever." She looked up sharply. "I am so sorry." He nodded once. "I know what it is to carry grief." They sat in silence for a time, the fire crackling between them, the air cooling. "I forgot what it felt like," she said after a while. "What? To feel safe." Mato did not reach for her. But he looked at her in a way that made her feel like maybe she could stand upright again after all. "You are safe here," he said, "for as long as you need." Eliza smiled, and for the first time in a long, long while, it reached her eyes. The first snow fell while Eliza was peeling strips of willow bark beside the older women near the river bend. The flakes came light and quiet, carried on a stillness that settled deep. No one remarked on it. They simply kept working, their hands steady, their eyes lifting now and then to the gray sky. Eliza kept her shawl tight, her fingers stiff from the cold, but she said nothing. She'd learned the rhythm of silence here, when to speak, when to listen, when to simply be. Daniel and Daisy had begun to find their own places in the camp. Daniel followed a boy named Wakasa through the brush, learning to make snares. Daisy spent her mornings with a woman called Red Willow who sang softly while weaving cattail mats. Eliza didn't hover, but her eyes followed them often. Mato came to her less now, not from distance but trust. He let her find her footing on her own. Still, when the fire burned low each evening, he always passed her a bowl first. He never said why. That afternoon, as the snow thickened, Eliza carried the bark back toward the cooking lodge. She heard the hooves before she saw the rider, a man on a paint horse, wrapped in a thick brown coat, his face wind-chapped, his eyes scanning. He rode straight toward Mato, who had been splitting kindling near the edge of the trees. Eliza stepped aside, unnoticed. "3 cattle wagons," the rider said in Lakota. "North Trail. White men, armed." Mato didn't speak right away. His jaw worked. Then he said, "Are they heading toward the ridge? They will pass close. Keep the children in camp. Tell 2 eagles." "I'll go watch." The rider turned without another word. Eliza waited until Mato finished gathering his bow and saddle gear. Then she stepped forward. "I heard," she said. He looked at her, eyes unreadable again. "You don't need to worry. You're going alone. I know the land. I won't be seen." She hesitated, her breath visible in the cold. "Do you think they'll come this way?" "I don't know yet." She glanced toward where Daisy's laughter carried faintly across the snow. "If they do, we'll move before they get within half a day's ride. You've done this before." His eyes softened just slightly. "Enough times to know how not to be found." She nodded, then surprised herself by reaching out, her fingers brushing the edge of his sleeve. "Be careful." He looked at her hand, then at her, and something passed between them, something unspoken but solid. "I will see you by nightfall." When he rode out, she watched until the trees swallowed him. That night he did not return. Eliza worked with the others, keeping her hands busy, her face unreadable. She washed roots, stirred broth, rubbed warmth into Daisy's feet. But her ears stayed sharp for hoofbeats, her eyes fixed on the dark beyond the firelight. Morning came, pale and brittle. Just after sunrise, a youth came running from the timber line. Eliza stood before he reached the fire. "He's back," the boy said. "His arm is hurt." She didn't wait. She pulled on her shawl and followed the boy into the woods. Mato sat on a fallen log, his left arm wrapped in a strip of his own shirt. Blood had soaked through. His horse stood nearby, reins trailing. Eliza knelt beside him without a word and peeled the cloth aside. A long gash, shallow but angry, ran from his shoulder to his upper arm. She opened the pouch at her hip and took out a strip of muslin and a small tin of bear fat she had traded for 3 days ago. He watched her work, silent. "You didn't say you were hurt," she said, voice quiet. "I didn't want them worrying until I knew what it was." "And what was it?" "Ranchers." Drunk, shooting at anything that moved, they'll pass. She bound the wound firmly, her fingers gentle but sure. You shouldn't have gone alone. If I hadn't, someone else would have. I know the land best. She tied off the cloth and leaned back. You're lucky it's not deeper. I know, he winced as he moved, and she steadied him without thinking. You didn't have to come, he said. I did, she answered. His gaze lingered on her face, then dropped to her hands. I thought I knew what it meant to carry someone's memory, he said quietly. But it's different now. She looked at him, heart thudding. How? Because now I see you, not just what you've lost, but who you are. The cold air seemed to still even further. Eliza stood slowly, then reached for his good arm. Come back to the lodge. Let the others see you're well. He let her help him up. As they walked back, side by side, the snow breaking softly beneath their boots, she felt the warmth of his shoulder near hers, not touching, not yet. But close enough to know it mattered. And it was enough. The wind dragged hard across the ridge that morning, rattling the lodge poles and lifting dry snow into low, curling spirals. Eliza stood outside the cooking shelter with her sleeves rolled to her elbows, stripping the last bits of meat from the elk leg Mato had brought down 2 days earlier. Her hands worked quick and clean, the cold biting her knuckles, but she didn't stop. Not even when Red Willow passed behind her and murmured something low in Lakota that made the others chuckle softly, something Eliza couldn't understand, but felt all the same. She didn't ask for a translation. She'd learned enough to know when to let things pass without answer. Inside the main shelter, Daniel and Daisy sat with Wakasa and another boy, shaping a toy travois from stripped willow branches. Eliza had seen Daniel's fingers move with more confidence lately. He'd started watching the men around camp the way her husband once had watched their mule team, studying without asking. Daisy had begun sitting straighter when Red Willow spoke, her chin tipped just slightly upward, like she was listening with her whole self. That quiet shift in them rooted, steadying made something in Eliza square itself, too. By midday, the wind died off. The sun warmed the snow just enough to soften the top layer, and Mato returned from the east slope with a brace of rabbits. He said nothing when he handed them to her, but his eyes lingered on the cut across her knuckles, the one she hadn't noticed until then. You're bleeding, he said. It's shallow. Let me see, she didn't argue. He took her hand gently, turning her palm toward the light. His thumb brushed just above the wound, then let go. You shouldn't work through pain. I've worked through worse. I know. She looked up at him then, the air between them still. I've been thinking, he said, about spring. She blinked. What about it? There's a stretch of land east of the river. Flat, good soil. It's been left alone the past few years. I asked 2 eagles if anyone still claims it. He says no, her breath caught without warning. You and the children could build there, he continued. It's close enough to the camp to keep ties, but yours enough to plant what you want, raise what you need. I wouldn't know where to start. You would, he said. You already have. She stared at the snow underfoot, then at the rabbits still in her hand. And you? I've built enough shelters alone. She looked at him fully then. You're saying this like a plan, not a passing thought. It is a plan. Eliza let the silence stretch between them, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she did. She saw the shape of it suddenly, a garden bed cut into thawed earth. A roof patched with her own hand, a place not borrowed. You'd stay there, she asked. With us, if you asked me to, he said. Later that evening, after the rabbits had been cleaned and the broth set to simmer, she found him again by the edge of the trees, where the last of the sun reached between the pine trunks. I never imagined a life past last winter, she said. He didn't speak. Everything I held fell through my hands, the farm, my husband, even the idea of what I thought I was. You held your children, he said, and you walked into the cold for them. That's not nothing. She stepped closer, her shawl drawn tight. I don't want to just survive anymore. His gaze didn't leave hers. Then don't. She reached for his hand, the one not still wrapped in healing cloth. He let her take it. I want a home, she whispered. Not a borrowed place, not a shelter for the season. He nodded once. Then we'll build one. The promise hung there between them, not loud, not rushed, just sure, and when she leaned her head against his shoulder, he turned slightly so she fit there as though she'd always belonged. The sun slipped behind the ridge, and the snow caught the last of the light like it was holding something sacred. Behind them, in the quiet camp, the pot boiled low. Children laughed somewhere near the lodge, and a new shape of life began to take hold, solid, warm, and real. By the time the snow began to crust over in late March, Eliza had memorized the sound of the wind against the north-facing pines, and the way the light shifted across Mato's cheek when he squinted toward the distant ridge. The days lengthened slowly, but the cold held on through the mornings, and the ground remained too stubborn to break. She stood beside him now, boots pressed into the thinning snow, watching him drive a stake into the frozen earth with the side of a stone mallet. "How deep do they need to go?" she asked. He paused, brushing hair out of his eyes with the back of his wrist. "Elbow deep. It'll hold once the thaw softens everything." She crouched beside the boundary line they'd walked 3 days ago. "That puts the lodge wall here," he nodded, "facing south. You'll want light in the mornings." She said, tightening her grip on the twine they were using to mark the frame. "We'll want that." His smile came slow, easy. "We will." From the tree line behind them, Red Willow's voice floated faintly. Daisy's laughter followed, tripping over a gust of wind. Eliza didn't turn. She knew the children were watched the way she and Mato watched them, quietly, without hovering but with care stitched into every glance. Mato set the mallet aside and stood. "The frame should go up before the end of the moon, if you want it ready by planting season." She straightened, flexing her fingers. "I can help with the beams." "You'll help with all of it," he said. "But I'll lift the heavy." They fell into silence, the way they often did now, not from distance, but from comfort. There wasn't a need to fill every space with words. After a while, Eliza asked, "What was your home like before?" He looked toward the hills, where the snow had begun to melt in streaks across the darker rock. 2 rooms, much smaller than this will be, but it had a stream behind it. Cold water, even in summer. "What happened to it? After they died, I left it for the land to take back." She didn't press further. Mato crouched again, checking the line where the stakes formed a rough rectangle. "You'll want a root cellar." "I hadn't thought that far. You will." Eliza moved to the northern edge and knelt, pressing her palm flat to the ground. "It's still hard. It'll break open soon." She looked up at him. "How do you know so surely?" His gaze held hers. "Because the earth always turns again, even after fire, even after loss." Back at camp, the smoke from the midday fire began to rise straighter, the wind easing. Eliza stood and brushed her hands clean. "I should check on the children. I'll finish marking the line." She hesitated. "You'll come back with me tonight?" Mato didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I'll come home with you." The word settled warm inside her chest. Later, in the shelter they'd been lent for the winter, Eliza combed the tangles from Daisy's hair while Daniel sketched antlers into the dirt floor with a stick. The stew she'd started earlier bubbled faintly. When Mato entered, he ducked low against the frame, carrying a bundle of firewood under one arm and a satchel of dried corn in the other. "Found this in one of the storage caches," he said, setting the corn beside the hearth. "Enough for planting." Eliza set the comb aside. "You think it'll take, if the ground's ready?" Daniel looked up. "Are we moving soon?" Mato crouched beside him. "We'll build first, then move." Daisy crawled into Eliza's lap, her voice muffled against her apron. "Will there be a garden?" "Yes," Eliza said softly. "And a place for your blanket, and a door that faces the morning." Mato reached over and touched Daisy's ankle gently. "And a tree for shade." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Can we have a pony?" Eliza laughed, surprised by how easily it came. "Let's get walls up first." That night, after the children slept and the fire burned low, Mato sat beside her beneath the firs. His hand found hers without words. She didn't pull away. "I never thought I'd build again," he said quietly. "Not after what I lost. I didn't think I'd live through last winter." He turned toward her. "But you did." She met his gaze. We both did. Outside, the night cracked softly as the snow shifted and an owl called low from the trees. Inside, the warmth held steady. Together, they sat in the hush of it, not waiting anymore, not surviving anymore, but beginning. The thaw came slow, as it always did in the high plains. The mornings were still sharp with frost, but the soil had begun to give under the weight of their boots, and the river ran faster with meltwater. By mid-April, the lodge frame stood upright, rough-hewn beams lashed tight with sinew and dried bark rope. Smoke no longer rose from their borrowed shelter in the camp, it now curled from the stone-ringed hearth Eliza had built with her own hands. Inside, the space was still bare. But when she stepped through the low doorway, she could see it. Where Daniel would keep the carved bird figurines he'd started making, where Daisy would lay her quilted blanket near the wall, where Mato's tools would hang from the pegs he'd shaped and driven in with a sure hand. That morning she knelt near the hearth, laying flat stones for the cookfire. The smell of wet earth drifted through the open door, and every so often she paused to press her palm to the dirt floor, feeling the weight of spring under her skin. Mato entered quietly, carrying a woven basket of early greens he'd foraged at first light. He set them beside her and crouched, brushing the dirt from his hands. "There's wild onion near the creek," he said. "It's coming up early." "Good," she said, reaching for the bundle. "It'll go well with the dried venison." He nodded and waited. She glanced at him, catching the way his eyes moved over the hearth, the roof timbers, the corners where shadows gathered. He wasn't checking for flaws. He was imagining the life they would live here. She sat back on her heels. "Tell me something I don't know about you." He looked at her, surprised, then thoughtful. "When I was a boy, I used to follow my uncle to the river to fish. I never caught anything, not once." She smiled. "You're better at it now. I still don't enjoy it." "Then why do you do it?" "Because Daniel does." They both turned at the sound of laughter outside. Daniel and Wakasa were near the edge of the clearing, tying a bundle of kindling with a strip of hide. Daisy was nearby, stacking stones in a careful ring for the garden beds. Eliza stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "They're not children the way they were when we arrived." "They haven't had to be," Mato said. "They've been allowed to grow." She turned to him. "And us, we've grown too." She stepped closer. "You never asked me if I wanted this." His voice was low. "I didn't want to push." "You didn't," she said. "But I do want it, you, this home, all of it." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers curling around hers. "Then it's yours. Not just today, not just until the season turns." She leaned into him, her head against his chest, and the steadiness of his breath met hers. That evening they gathered around the fire in their new lodge. Red Willow brought a woven pouch of dried fruit as a gift. Wakasa's father offered a carved bowl, polished smooth. No speeches were made. No formal declarations. Just food passed from hand to hand, laughter traded in quiet tones, and the warmth of belonging settling into the beams and corners of their home. After the others left and the fire burned low, Eliza sat with Mato by the doorway. Daniel and Daisy slept curled under their blankets, their breaths even. The stars stretched far above, and the sound of the river reached them faintly, steady and familiar. Mato drew her close. "You once said you forgot what it felt like to be safe." She looked up at him. "I remember now." He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything, only promised. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. In the months that followed, the garden grew. Daniel built a perch for a hawk that had begun to circle the clearing. Daisy planted wildflowers along the edges of the lodge. Mato carved a bench for the doorway. Eliza baked bread in a clay oven she shaped herself, the scent of it drifting through the trees like a banner of home. Neighbors from the camp came and went. Supplies were traded. New tools built. The sound of hammering gave way to singing, and the hard ground turned soft beneath their feet. By the end of summer, the lodge was not just built, it was lived in. And love, quiet and rooted, lived there too. Not in grand gestures, but in the way Mato placed his hand at the small of Eliza's back when she passed. The way she saved the last bit of honey for his tea. The way Daniel and Daisy called him father without effort or pause. They did not speak of the past often. It remained, as pasts do, but it no longer led them. Instead, they rose with the morning light, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, and faced each day as one together. Always.